Hello and welcome back to the Consistory of the Coelc YouTube channel. I'm your host of this video, Reverend Zabel of St John's Evangelical Lutheran Church located in Dalby, Queensland, Australia. In this video we're continuing through my series, What It Means to be a Lutheran, going through the part 3 of the Smalcald articles, Article 12 on the Church. In the Unum Sanctum of 1302, Pope Boniface VIII declared that the Greeks or others who do not submit themselves to the Roman Pope are not to be considered sheep of Christ. This view was reaffirmed post-Reformation at the 1870 First Vatican Council, where it was stated that in order to be a member of the Church of Christ, one needed to be united to the Roman Pope. Thus, for Rome, you are not a member of the Church unless you submit to the headship of the Roman Pope. The Church is defined as those who submit to the Pope. Martin Luther declares that we do not concede to them that they are the Church, and frankly, they are not the Church at all. Now, in the Article 4 of Part 2 of the Smalcald articles, we discussed how the Pope is the fulfillment of the end times Antichrist, and that he is the fulfillment of Paul's prophecy in 2 Thessalonians 2:4 about the one who takes his seat in the temple or church of God. So if the Pope is the end times Antichrist, he needs to be one who is seated in the church of God. Thus, the Roman Catholic Church needs to be, part of the church. Or at least it needs to be part of the visible church. For you see, the church exists in two forms, the visible and the invisible. The visible is all those on earth who profess to be Christian. This includes true Christians, but also hypocrites, those who are either Christians in name only, or even those who may outwardly confess Christ, but the Christ that they are confessing is not a true Christ. The true church, however, is invisible and is known to God alone, and it is scattered throughout the world and even amongst numerous different denominations. Not just Lutherans, but even non-Lutherans. See, Philip Melanchthon, he states that the church is to be considered the place where the gospel is preached purely and the holy sacraments are administered rightly in accordance with the gospel. This definition by Melanchthon has led some Lutherans to wrongfully limit the church to just the divine service when the word and sacraments are administered. But Luther, in his article on the Smalcald articles, he defines the church as the flock of Christians, the gathering of holy believers who follow their shepherd. The church are the Christians, and we don't simply stop being the church just when service finishes. We remain the church even after the service. Because the church is not the service, the church is the people who gather for the service. These marks, the preaching of the word and the administration of the sacraments are the marks of the church. For as I said, the true church is invisible and God alone knows it. It is not possible for any human to know exactly who is and isn't a member of this true church. There are many individuals who outwardly confess the truth, but inwardly believe otherwise, and even those who might outwardly confess something that is wrong, but inwardly are true believers. This is what we in Lutheranism call the inconsistency of doctrine. That there are those who confess to be Roman Catholic or Baptist, and if they are consistent with their church's teachings, they are not true Christians. They deny Christ, they deny the faith. The Christ they believe in is a false Christ. However, there are many who may belong to these heterodox churches who, through an inconsistency of doctrine, actually do confess the true faith and have a belief in the true Christ. And we can see the existence of such individuals in the book of Revelation. In Revelation chapter 18, St. John gets this vision of Babylon the Great. This is a reference to the false church, particularly the church of the Antichrist, the Roman Catholic Church. And then the voice of God comes out of heaven and says, "Come out of her, my people, lest you partake in her sins, lest you share in her plagues." So here we can see that even within this false church, this heterodox church, there are still people who are God's people. There are still true believers. However, they are called to come out of her, not to fellowship with her. This is why we have closed communion. This is why we have church fellowship. See, we can't see with our eyes who are the true members of the church. We can only make judgments based on the outwards confession of churches. And we know that, yes, even in our true churches, our Orthodox congregations, there will be heterodox people. And we also know that there are people in the heterodox churches who are true Orthodox believers. However, God calls on us to flee from false teachers and to gather together with the true teachers. And the reason for this is that, as God says in the book of Revelation, he says to come out of her lest you partake in her sins. Come out of that heterodox church lest you start to partake in her false teachings. See, even if you are an Orthodox true believer, the longer you are in a heterodox church, the more likely you are going to adopt those heterodox teachings and turn away from the truth, turn away from Christ, and lose your faith. The longer you are in a heterodox church, the more you put your faith at risk. On the flip side, if you are a heterodox hypocrite who has somehow snuck your way into an Orthodox church, the longer you stay in that Orthodox church, you might change your views. You might be properly informed. You might actually come to the knowledge of truth. So therefore it is better to flee the heterodox and to gather with the Orthodox, because the longer you stay at the heterodox, the more you put your faith at risk, and the longer you stay with the Orthodox, the more you strengthen your faith. And so we need to seek out Orthodox churches where the Word of God is preached purely and the sacraments are administered rightly. And as Luther said, the holiness of the church does not consist in vestments or human ceremonies, but the holiness of the church exists in the Word of God and in the true faith. Well, that's a bit of a shorter episode today. I've been your host, Reverend Jake Zabel. Goodbye and God bless.